There you go.
January 24th, Tyson Foods made a statement strongly opposed to illegal immigration, will fully participate with the E-Verify and image programs. Um,
I heard it happened Friday.
I mean, I've got this sorted by time, and I see nothing in the past month even.
Okay.
Well, that's all right. I guess it's just a rumor. I
Stay
guess
tuned.
that's why we should all triple check our sources right now.
Yeah, I mean, 5 days ago there was something in Lexington, Nebraska. What to do if there's an immigration raid in a rural area of Nebraska?
Run.
All right,
I
I'm gonna go
thought
ahead and let
it
these
said
people in.
Lexington.
I'm gonna let these people in so
All right,
that we
Okay.
can get
Thanks,
people in
Chase.
by 10-ish and then start
yeah,
by
I'm good.
10. Okay.
Good morning. Welcome.
Hi,
Good
Allison.
morning. Good morning. It's good to see so many people hopping on today. We're going to give it a couple minutes and then we'll get started here shortly. Good morning, everybody. As we're getting started, we're letting folks in right now. I'm going to go ahead and throw a couple of things in the chat for us today. Whether this is your first webinar joining us, welcome, or maybe you've stuck with us through COVID for the last few years. And now we're picking up again from policy to practice, navigating post-inauguration. So excited to see everybody today. Thank you for joining us. If you don't want to miss a future webinar, the best way to get a hold of us and to make sure that you see our future webinars is to sign up for our newsletter. So I'm going to go ahead and throw in a link in the chat. So don't miss another free webinar from us. We always try to get SHRM and HRCI credit as well. So make sure that you sign up for our newsletter if you can. And then if you want to check out our other webinars, those are also available on our website, Hannah Resource Group, /HRG Webinar Library under our resources tab. So it's 10:01. Thank you again for joining us, Jim, today. So happy that we have so many people on. This is a topic, it feels like we're back in COVID times. We never know what tomorrow will bring. So thank you, Jim, again for joining us. I know you spent quite a bit of time putting the presentation together as well as even making changes all the way up until today as it's ever evolving. So if you have any questions along the way, please throw them in the chat. We'll answer a few as we go, and then we'll definitely leave time at the end for questions. And wanted to go ahead and get started quickly as Jim has about an hour and a half of material. So we're going to move pretty quickly here. So thank you, Jim, again for joining us. You are our expert on all things as what's happening at post-inauguration. So I'm going to kick it over to you. Good luck.
Well, thank you, and thanks for having me on. We've got a lot to cover, so I am going to hammer through this and try to get as much done as I can. We're going to cover several things today. The elections, we had one post-election, but we didn't talk about it with regard to actual impact, and a lot of the predicted things that were going to happen in December have happened, but they have more clarity now. So I wanted to walk through these with you. There are obviously executive orders, and those executive orders have far-reaching implications. Got some regulatory changes we're going to talk about. The tariffs, which are taking shape now, and I've actually been on the Hill working on some exemptions for that in DC. So I've got some information on the different types and what they mean. I was already working, like I said, 2 months ago in the 118th Congress, and then when 119 started, trying to get certain businesses exempted under certain provisions of the tariffs. So if you have questions on that, I can try to help. If they're too specific, you'll probably need to reach out because I can't give individual advice on a continuing education course. The immigration enforcement, I'm going to touch on that, but that still has literally it's what the law is what is being enforced. So whatever you had in place before, you may want to plug and play, put it back in, because there's no change in the immigration status. It's just being enforced now. And then there's the tax and financial implications that is pretty much the same as what I talked about before, but I'm going to touch on it just in case you weren't on here the last time. All right, so executive orders, there were several entered. I'm going to list these, but we're going to talk about several here in a minute. So there's the 14173, which is ending illegal discrimination, restoring merit-based opportunity. Then there was the 14151, ending radical and wasteful government DEI programs. Several immigration-related executive orders, trade policy adjustments, energy policy shifts, regulatory freeze pending review. That's a big one if you deal with any government contracts. The TikTok ban suspension I put in here because a lot of businesses are using TikTok to advertise, especially small to mid. The federal funding freeze and the removal of the EEOC NLRB commissioners. This last one is probably the most impactful on you, and you didn't probably even know that the people were removed. So we'll talk about that here in a second as well. Let's start out with, let's also talk about the rescission of harmful executive orders. There was a blanket executive order that voided a tremendous number of orders that had been entered by the previous administration. The first one and the second one are a lot of the DEI type, and we're going to cover these all in one lump to try to get through all of this. And then once we get done, if you have specific questions, we can go back and chat about those. Actually, the first three have all DEI type components or anti-discrimination. And so we'll talk about those. The science and tackling climate crisis is allowing additional natural resources to be obtained and has changed some of the restrictions on businesses going forward with regard to the ability to use different types of resources and not rely on solar, not be hamstrung on some of the things that have been put in place. Then there is the tackling the climate crisis at home and abroad. Again, huge launch of natural resources. It's funny because when Kendra and I were talking about doing this, I literally said to her, and unfortunately I didn't follow my own advice. I said, okay, there's three things that I would tell every client you have right now if you ever get a chance to talk about investment. I said, you need to invest, number one, in electricity stocks, because artificial intelligence is going to be launched and they have to have a huge amount of electricity, and they're going to spin up new electrical centers. Well, they then announced $500 billion, $500 billion investment in artificial intelligence centers. Electricity stocks went through the roof. The second one I told her was invest in all of the artificial intelligence type arenas you can that were US based. Same thing happened. The third one was invest in cryptocurrency, and cryptocurrency went haywire, and I didn't invest in any of them. So I told other people to do it, and then I just ran out of time. So there's that. The minimum wage for federal contractors has been revoked, and then ensuring adequate COVID safety protocols has been revoked for both federal contractors and federal employees. Those are listed in case you have a federal contract. I know I've had several people on here who have reached out on needing some guidance on federal contractor work. If you have a federal contractor situation with the federal government, you probably need to have additional guidance from legal counsel because of the number of changes, because there is no longer a separate minimum wage. There is no longer COVID requirement. There's no longer a COVID vaccine requirement. A lot of those things have been thrown out. So if you have that, we're not going to touch on that tremendously because it's so nuanced with the federal contractor, but pull out your book on your contract with them, because there's a contract and all the addenda and so on, and make sure that those are still enforceable as written. So what are we going to cover? First, we're going to cover about the executive orders on corporate diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. This is a massive, massive change. Now, the irony is this. I was asked by Kentucky SHRM and I don't know how many of you were at that meeting in August of 2023. See this right here? This is what I pulled out from the August of 2023 meeting. See the date? Walking the tightrope, how to balance inclusion without tripping over legal risk. At the time, I said to everybody right here, the risks associated with DEI initiatives are only positioned to grow and expand as companies look to thread the DEI needle. I constantly preached, if you were on any of these meetings with us, these Zoom meetings or the Kentucky SHRM, do not be the company out in front of this. Coca-Cola, and I literally listed them. Coca-Cola went too far. Lowe's went too far. And one of the examples I gave was the National Hockey League down in Florida doing they literally had a job fair I think it was in Miami, and they posted that whites need not apply. This was for minorities, LGBTQ, TAI plus, and women of color, but there were no white men allowed, no whites allowed, and they then came back and apologized and said veterans can apply. Then the governor sent them a letter from their EEOC and the Human Rights Commission and said this is absolute violation of anti-discrimination, and you must pull down your advertisement because you cannot preclude one race from being involved. So at that time, we also talked about, and I'm not going to read all these, but we talked about the fact that DEI efforts right now or back then had no meaningful compliance or legal oversight. These were the problems with some of the DEI initiatives. And so I'm not going to read through it, but here is a primer, and this was on the other one as well at the time. Kentucky law says, and it's right here is the main, because you cannot engage in any blah, 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 based upon race, color, religion, national origin, sex, age 40 or over, or because the person is a qualified individual with a disability, or in the state of Kentucky, because the individual is a smoker or a non-smoker. Literally, the law precludes treating anyone that is similarly situated different from other individuals. So when all of these DEIs came out, I cautioned everybody over and over again, focus on inclusion. Focus on inclusion of diverse groups of people in your organization. Focus on access to diverse groups of people. So inclusion of diverse, equity in everything you do, but in no way should you be jumping off the platform with these massive companies that were literally saying we're going to give preference to minorities. We're going to give preference to the LGBTQ TAI+. In that instance, every single one of those were engaging in discrimination because they literally were precluding whites, women, in some instances, African American, because they were focused on other diverse groups. And that scared me to death. So I kept saying, don't be the first and don't be out in front. Make subtle changes, make sure you're including people, but don't set a policy that is in violation of the law. Title VII, ADA, and this was from the last time as well. The law protects all persons regardless of identity from discrimination. It does not allow for selection of anyone based upon any of the protected classifications. If you do select any person based upon a protected classification, you are engaging in discrimination, even if it's well-intentioned. So what all did that mean? And this was, again, a statistic I pulled in August of 23. 52% of 1,000 hiring managers said that they were engaging in reverse discrimination. This is in August of 23. And it only got worse in terms of the reverse discrimination moving forward. So you have a huge number of companies that I believe are facing liability I believe there will be a massive amount, and I said it back then, and I said it on these webinars like 3 different times. Be careful, because sooner or later there's going to be an attorney that's going to start representing all of the reverse discrimination. They're going to make a boutique practice out of it, and they're going to start suing every business that advertised that we're giving priority to whichever of the diverse groups that they wanted to hire, because the law, Title VII, ADA, ADEA, the Rehabilitation Act, the Veterans, everything literally says you cannot do this for any reason. So we had policies enforced by the EEOC and the White House executive orders, when the reality is there was no congressional law that allowed you to engage in pre-selection, selective recruitment. Those are bad words under long-standing case law. So what has happened with this? I think that's the end. All right, I'm gonna skip these. So here's the reality of this. This is now a new slide. The rest were, I just want to show, it's been the same talking points from me. Be careful all the way through, all the way back to 2021, 2020. I was saying, do not buy into wholesale adoption of DEI policies that are not evidence-driven, legally supported, because you can do a well-intentioned policy, and if you substitute, and I said this at the time too, take one word out and switch it. We're only going to hire white males instead of insert whichever one, and everybody would be saying, oh my gosh, that is clear discrimination. You can't do that. Well, the reverse is true as well. You literally cannot say we are targeting this protected classification for hiring, or we won't consider. Either way, that's discrimination. So this has an immediate impact on any of the corporate DEI policies. It refocuses the executive branch, including the EEOC, on existing law. Those laws have been on the books, Title VII, 1964, ADA later, ADEA. ADA is Americans with Disabilities. ADEA is Age Discrimination Employment Act, Equal Pay Act. All of those now are as written. So if anybody's thinking that the new executive orders literally are manufacturing law or are creating a new area, and oh my gosh, we're in huge, we don't know what to do, this is all, actually the new executive orders voided orders that said we're going to adopt a policy with the EEOC of DEI requirements. That was not supported by the legislature. You have to have, again, go back to the I'm just a bill on Saturday mornings, a little cartoon, or go back to your civics, and you think about it, the executive branch can only enforce existing law. Legislative is the one that has to create new laws. Judicial interprets those laws to assure that they're in compliance with the Constitution. The executive branch, when these DEI initiatives were issued, did not have authority to change the underlying statutory mandates. So we've gone back to what has been the law all the way through Obama, Bush 1, Bush 2, Clinton. The laws have been the same with the exception of they've added pregnancy protections, they've added other protections throughout the years, but the main Title VII, anti-discrimination, and the appendages, as I call them, ADA, ADEA, those have been the same. And now we're back to treat everybody in the similar positions exactly the same. Do not treat people who are similarly situated different. And you've been on these, I call it the golden rule. Treat everybody the same. If you want to treat them bad, treat them all bad. Don't do it because of any protected classification. All right, so this rule now eliminated preferences based on protected classifications. It does justify anti-discrimination litigation regarding DEI initiatives. It enhances merit-based hiring and promotions, which is the law of the land back to 1964. Policies that ignored those, must be modified, and they must be modified immediately. I laughed a little because right after the election in November, several big companies, and I've got them listed here. Some of these are brand new. Some of them started changing in November of 2024 because they knew that what they were doing was not supported under the law. So as soon as the election came in, people started making their changes. The problem is this: the administration had not yet been in place until the inauguration on January 20th. So if you started making changes in November of 2024 or December or the beginning of January to remove your DEI, you can't rely on the new executive order to be the reason for it. So if I'm a savvy attorney representing plaintiffs and people start changing before January 20th, now what I have is I can show what under the law is called scienter, or knowledge. This company knew what they were doing was illegal. And as soon as the election came through and they knew that these policies would be revoked in 2 months, they started making changes. Well, those changes weren't mandated by an executive order revoking all the rest of them. These people were making changes because they're like, uh-oh, we know we've either been sued or we're going to be sued. We better make changes right now because we know that this doesn't meet federal law. And that's where I had debates going on with general counsels across the country that I assist on these types of things. And I kept telling them, you can't adopt a policy that is not based on the law, because sooner or later you're going to get sued by a group of people and there's no defense to it. So all these people that waited until January 20th probably will be wiser, because what they can say is, well, listen, there was a president in place that said, I don't care what the law is, here's what we're going to enforce, and the EEOC governs my business. I waited until his new order came in, then we made the changes. It's not a defense, because the statutory law is what you have to go by, not an executive order. But it is at least a partial defense to why you changed it. Those that changed in November and December, they don't really have the ability to say, well, yeah, but as soon as the executive order came in and voided those, I had to comply with the new laws. I went back to our old policy. They didn't. They did it prematurely. So Meta, McDonald's, Amazon, Walmart, Ford, Lowe's, Harley-Davidson, John Deere, Tractor Supply, Boeing, Target, all those, Coca-Cola, Pepsi-Cola. I mean, I could list and list and list. These were the companies I kept telling everybody had overreached with their policies, had gone too far. They weren't just including diverse groups. They literally were excluding other groups from opportunities. And that's where I kept saying, don't exclude anybody. Be careful with how you're handling it. I put in here the recent successful litigation. I only went back to January. McDonald's settled on Saturday. Literally on Saturday, they agreed that they had a DEI policy. It was a Latino, Latinx only apply scholarship. No one else was allowed to apply. No one else was allowed to, even though they met all of the needs-based criteria, nobody else was allowed to. They got that. They got hit. Pfizer got hit. IBM got hit. When I say 2024, it was December. I did put in the Morrison and Forster and Perkins Coie. Perkins Coie is a big lobbying group in D.C., and the fact that they had that in place, they got hit with that. And there's no defense. You can't say, well, look, the president's not enforcing the law. Federal judges don't care. They can't go on the fact that we were trying to be good people. They have to go on what's the law. And the law says you can't omit white males, black males, Latino, non-gender, binary, literally does not matter. You can't engage in that kind of discrimination. So everybody on this call, if you did a DEI, which I hope everybody did it, because I've been preaching that for 20 years as well, not necessarily diversity. I call it difference, which is inclusion of diverse groups. I don't like preaching diversity because it sounds like we're trying to force everybody separate. I like including all diverse groups: thought, race, sexual orientation, background, everything. It goes well beyond just the way it's been coined. But if you have not done an evaluation, you need to do one now to make sure that your DEI policies are actually in compliance with underlying statutory mandates and that you didn't go too far in giving one or the other additional benefit or additional benefit or consideration under your hiring, promotion, pay rates, anything like that. All right. So the next one is tariffs. And I didn't spend a lot of time on it because I wasn't sure. I felt like some of these countries would comply with some of the things. I knew China wouldn't. But I thought that we would have compliance by Mexico and Canada before he took office or right after, so we wouldn't have imposition of tariffs. If you have any businesses, if your business does anything with any products, I've got like the spirits industry here. I've got some bourbon company involvement, and the problem is that cork comes from somewhere else. The bottle caps, the bottles themselves, the labels, the glue for the labels, the straps on the barrels. Not everything is made right here. So you end up with a lot of issues in getting things from other countries. If you deal in a product and you receive anything from another country, you're going to be hit with the tariffs. I have a whole set, and this is why I was on the Hill. Everything in the industry that I'm representing on the Hill is made in China. There's a manufacturing facility in the United States that all they do is they get raw materials because China is the sole source outside of a very niched Italian market, sole source worldwide. And I'll tell you, it's the ophthalmic industry, glasses, frames, that type of thing. They have products. Everybody thinks they're plastic if you're wearing glasses. It's not. It's called acetate. So the side of this is called acetate. It has a little rod in here. The rod is a special metal made in China. Acetate's all made in China. The screws are all made in China, and the lenses are all made in China. We're trying to get that excluded under the FDA and get the FDA to work with the Fair Trade Commission to understand it's a medical device necessity that should not be subject to a tariff. You need to start looking into that. One of the issues people are trying to do is, wait, what if we just have it made in Taiwan? And we have it shipped from China to Taiwan, then we buy it from Taiwan. Does not matter. It's the country of origin. Wherever the raw materials or product or parts of products come from, you're going to be taxed based on that. And if you try to avoid it, you're going to be subject to sanctions in addition. So here are the tariffs. Tariffs can create shifts in global markets, trade patterns, and other things. They're aimed to protect domestic industries. In this instance, they're also aimed at an emergency based on fentanyl and the drugs coming across. Long-term impact depends on how it's going to be handled, how they adapt to this. So in this instance, the types of tariffs that could be used, I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but if you want to know, you can give me a call. 301-232 and the IEEPA, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. There are a few other. Trade Expansion Act has a few other codes that are being used. 601 specifically was referenced as a potential basis for this. The big one here that was used was the IEEPA. Congress has given authority. Again, I told you that Congress has to establish the law and the president can only enforce the law as it has been established. Congress set forth the Trade Act of 1974, the Trade Expansion Act of 1962, and the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. These are authorities given to all presidents when they come in. Under these, there were differing bases for why things could be done. What ended up happening, and this was on Saturday night late, it was announced on the 20th, it was announced during the campaign, it was announced after the election. On the 20th, there was one executive order entered that said basically There's a justification for a national emergency for the fentanyl and the drugs coming across, the lack of a border, and so on. Then on Friday, the White House announced through their press secretary that there were tariffs that were being implemented on February 1st, as previously promised. I looked, no executive order. On Saturday, I put all this together. I looked, no executive order. I was like, well, that's odd. Maybe they're going to go with a memorandum. Saturday night late, around 9 o'clock, 8:30 or 9, they came out with the executive orders being signed, one for China, one for Canada, and one for Mexico. And so I should move forward, sorry. Here's the timeline. These are additional tariffs. China already had tariffs. These are 10% additional on all things from China. Canada's a little different. It's 25% tariff, except 10% on energy, coal, natural gas, gasoline, oil. Energy related are only 10% because we actually import from Canada substantial amount of energy. I expect that's going to change to a 25% here shortly, because it says right here there's a non-retaliation clause. I'm going to put on my laser pointer here so you can see it. There's a non-retaliation clause. Literally, if anybody retaliates by trying to come back with a tit for tat or other issue, we have the ability to up our tariffs. I believe, first of all, Canada did on Saturday night come back with a 25 across the board on everything U.S. based. Immediately removed spirits from the nationally owned liquor stores. They have both ABC, we would call them ABC store, and private. They removed all liquor from that so that people wouldn't buy it up, and then they're going to have to pay a tariff on it. So that happened. There were other things that they did, and he's now promoting only buy Canadian. Mexico announced, we don't know what we're going to do yet, but we will retaliate with our own. China has not yet spoken on it from what I could tell. The president also announced the intent to do something with the European Union. And then this morning or late last night, there was an issue with South Africa, where South Africa is engaging in some retaliatory actions against certain classifications of people in South Africa. And in response to that, there's been a notification if they don't straighten up, there will be a tariff. These are carrot and stick issues, and also it's to equalize things. If you are not aware of economics and what goes on internationally, it's been a one-sided street for a very long time with the United States. We're in a $200 billion deficit to Canada, $200 billion or $150 billion deficit to Mexico, $300 billion deficit to the European Union. There's a need to start protecting our American-made products overseas and requiring a fair trade. This is the way. If you didn't know, also historically, you never used to pay a federal income tax. It used to all be based on tariffs. And then it traded in the early 1900s to an income tax-based situation. Completely policy-driven, but also in this instance, this particular tariff is based upon the fentanyl, drug overdoses, the emergency need to shut down the border with all of those coming across. So the policy was, we're going to do this until China stops sending the materials over to be made. Mexico shuts down the fentanyl trade, and Canada stops allowing open border. So, and Mexico as well. So that's what that status is. It is in addition to other tariffs that are already existing, because those are so multiplying. I didn't go through because it would be pages on what China currently has with the different levels and so on. Canada had some, but they were small on certain goods only, and it's just a nightmare to go through. So 10, 25, 25. it's going to impact everything, because even if you're in the service industry only, the products you purchase, computers come from China, you're going to have an increase. Components in cars, chip manufacturing right now, China-based. We have a U.S. Chip Act that we're trying to get through that will make chips made here, pharmaceuticals made here. But right now, a lot of stuff comes from China. And so if you're going to buy something, go out and buy it now, because it doesn't impact anything that was already imported. It will impact things that come in that were made after or shipped after February 1st, or put into a warehouse after February 4th. So those are the dates. So there's going to be, as I said, additionals coming out, European Union and so on. You're going to have foreign competition go down. That's the good side. U.S. based, U.S. made is going to go up. The problem is raw materials are going to go up as well. Even if you have that in the U.S., you can't, and this is what I'm fighting right now, you can't use the Made in America logo or sticker if any single component comes from outside. So even though everything at this manufacturing facility for the glasses is made in America, the acetate had to come from China, and so they can't use at all, even though it was just a raw sheet of hard acetate. It's not plastic, but even though it's just a sheet of material, they can't use the Made in America. So we're trying to work on that. But if you are competing with international, this will help, but it will raise the prices. It'll impact exports to Canada and Mexico, as well as China, of course. Supply chain issues are going to be a problem because of the cost. You're also going to have increased product cost and increased cost of goods. What does this mean to you as an employer? Chances are, if this isn't changed promptly, you're going to end up with a situation where you're going to not be able to hire a lot of people. You're going to have to be more selective, because everything gets increased across the board, because it's going to be lower income to employers, higher product purchases for employers, and then higher cost of your goods being sold. It's going to mean less discretionary spending by consumers. However, if you go back to, I think it was Colombia, President Trump announced a 25% tariff, and all of their nationals wouldn't be allowed in the United States if they didn't accept their hardened criminals that were being shipped back to them. And within 24 hours, the president of Colombia said, I'll have my presidential airplane there ready to pick them up, and we'll take them back to Colombia, and please don't put a 25% tariff on us. These are used to get action. They will get action, and I suspect that Trudeau will sit down and speak to the president in the first few days of this week. There will be an agreement reached on border protection, border patrol, and that will be lifted rather quickly. Mexico's a little bit different because of the cartels that are operating right south of the border and the need for additional military action on the south side of the border. I don't know, but I suspect that that's going to also be negotiated rather quickly, with additional enforcement coming as quick as possible. So this is a big shot over the bow, so to speak, right now. But I suspect that this will be lifted rather quickly. The impact will be minimal, because it will be what you're purchasing right now. Hold off on buying anything after the February 1st, unless it's already in the supply chain in the United States, or on a boat, plane, or vehicle already boxed up, ready to come into the United States. It's okay. But just hold off on purchasing things right now, so you don't pay that 25% hike tax until it can be settled. It's not moving forward. Sorry. All right. So the impact, tariffs reduce foreign competition, impact exports, cause critical supply. Imported materials may cause increased material costs for your final products. Trade barriers, potential lower demand, increased cost, and lower international demand for U.S. products, especially in those affected countries. The other worry I have, if this isn't quickly resolved, is a potential trade war They've gone to 25, we go to 50. They go to 50, we go to 75. They go to 75, we go to 100. You know, it's childish, but it's a back and forth until the game of chicken is done. It's a needed stop on the border, and we couldn't get the countries to stop sending the caravans up through Mexico. The Canadian one is a little different, but I actually had a little bit of knowledge about the Frozen family in outside of Minneapolis because I had a trial that was going on at the same time as theirs. But the whole family from India that tried to come in illegally through the Canadian border and literally got left in a van because a drug deal gone bad and they were worried about the U.S. government. So 25 feet onto our border, these people literally froze to death. And so there is a huge problem ongoing with the northern border as well. It needs to be addressed. Nobody would listen. This is like the last ditch effort to get people to listen. Hopefully it won't last long. So, all right. So the immigration directives and immediate impact. If you were on the December, late November, December, I think we waited until beginning of December. This is a lot familiar with what we talked about. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time. We talked about it before. The new, there's H-1B and L-1 visas are facing increased scrutiny. There's now merit-based immigration. I've heard all kinds of rumors. We talked about one this morning that there's, and I'm not saying it couldn't have happened, but I pulled it up and not one news reference, not one legitimate post about it, that there were raids of businesses in Kentucky in a certain sector. Could not find at all that that was actual. What they are starting with on the raids that they're doing is what they call worst first. Those are not your everyday workers. Those are the trend Aragua. I'm sorry, I probably butchered that. That's the gang out of Venezuela, the M13 gang out of Mexico. They are going through and arresting those. What's been amazing to me is apparently we knew exactly where they were the whole time, and we were just allowing them to do all of their drug activity, their gang activity, because as soon as the switch flipped, ICE knew exactly where they were, went in, arrested them. There's a running total of who's been arrested, and these aren't rank and file food workers or people out in the fields. These are gang members. However, they have said if you are engaging in activities with the drug dealer gang member, blah, 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 and you get pulled in as part of this raid, they will ship you out because you are here illegally, but they are not focused on the food worker, the farm worker, the immigrants who are here doing work. They are focused on the immigrants who are here doing drug activity and so on. So these are the changes that have been implemented or are being implemented. These are the policies. The border is being enforced now. It has gotten down to, there was a 3 days ago, for the first time in 5 years, one of the sectors on the border said they had 0 gotaways, which they're tracking with heat sensing and all that. They had 0 for the first time in 5 years, 4.5 years, and that it was a welcome from the border thing. It was a welcome change. That's a normal, that's just enforcement of the policy or of the border laws, but you're going to see a decrease if you rely on any of that for your farm sector or other sector. There is a legal seasonal worker, and they're allowed across. They just go across the border as a legal seasonal. The people who are coming over illegally, you're going to see a shutdown on a lot of that. So that's your immigration status. I did this. I couldn't find red tape.
Hey, Jim, real quick on immigration. So sorry to interrupt you. I've got a couple
Yeah.
questions that came through on what happens if immigration shows up? What happens if ICE shows up to a business? I know you're saying that's not happening so far, but what
Yeah.
obligation do you have as a business to work with ICE and what does that look like?
So ICE will be showing up probably with official paperwork from the FISA court or a different court system. But under the law, ICE has the authority to go anywhere it needs to enforce the immigration laws and to round up those that are in violation of the laws. Now, I've heard, well, I'm not going to open the door. You can do that, but they're just going to, if they don't have the warrant already, they're going to come back with one. I would contact an attorney to make sure that you're in accordance with whatever the current rules are. I have not researched, because I usually tell them don't get in between ICE and what they're doing, because you could become a target of, it's not retaliatory, it just becomes, wait a minute, if they're not enforcing ICE laws, what else aren't they enforcing? And they will end up looking at your books, because if you're paying people off book, then you're not collecting the appropriate taxes and so on. So I usually say, don't be a jerk about it, but make sure that you understand what their parameters are in coming. I've heard a lot of misinformation, disinformation. There was one in Illinois where they literally said that they were raiding schools. They came out later and acknowledged that that was not the case. It wasn't even ICE. It was a different agency altogether that actually was invited into the school. That kind of thing is scaring a lot of people. I don't anticipate raids on businesses unless you're flagrantly doing it. And I've heard examples of that where there are companies that are literally flouting the law and doing things illegally. They're probably going to be hit eventually, but they aren't doing it now. My recommendation is you need a policy in place that instructs the person at the door, all of your managerial, all of your administrative, everybody, this is what we're going to do. And you need to make sure everybody understands this is what you're going to do, because you can't have, and this goes back to my very first webinar with you all, was the wireframe that I did for the media, because I happen to represent a major international manufacturing facility that was the first one hit with the decision of, do we shut down operation? Do we continue? They were working with the governor's office. We had a whole, how do we get through HIPAA? How do we get through? I had to contact the hospital. It was a nightmare because they didn't have that policy in place, even though I told them in January, this thing's coming. It's in Seattle. I'm really worried about it. Talking about COVID. We need to have a policy. They didn't do it because they're like, yeah, no, I think we're all right. We'll wait for somebody else to be hit first, and then we'll do theirs. We don't want you to write it. They were the first one. And I had to do it on a Friday night, Saturday morning to make sure that we were on top of it before next shift, because we were going to shut down entire automotive manufacturing facility, all 3 shifts, if we didn't find out the answer. And by the way, the person had lied and said she and her child, and back then no children had ever gotten it. This was like the beginning of February, right when they were shutting down, or right when they were shutting down the NCAA tournament was when this all happened, that Friday night. So you need a policy in place. I can't tell you individually how to handle it. That gets into the weeds so much. I can't do individual. It depends on which product you're in as well. There are certain additional, I'm just going to pick on 3. If you are in the spirits industry, you have an entirely different federal oversight. They may have different ability than somebody who's just running a service. If you are in the food industry, entirely different framework. If you are in international and there's a different control, or if you deal with as a federal contractor, all of those things are factors that I would have to take into consideration to figure out, how do I fashion your particular policy? But you darn well better have everybody from the guy with the key at the front entrance or the gate or whatever it is, to the janitor, to after hours, to management, administrative, and everyday workers. Because if anybody does something contrary to what you are obligated to do, you're going to be held responsible. So everybody needs to know, if this, then we do the following. Okay?
Yeah. And you've got about
So
10 minutes left, and I want to leave time for
yep,
questions too. Sorry to rush you.
I got 3 slides, and we're going to roll quick. So regulatory changes, I covered a lot of this before, and I've covered a lot of this right now. Increased oil, natural gas, clean coal. That's going to decrease some of your costs. However, with Canada being in there, we'll see how the markets play out because of the increase to the cost of the oil in Canada. Closing of the borders we talked about. The artificial intelligence, I kind of already joked about that. I wish I'd played that. Reduced governmental regulatory restrictions is going to have an impact on you. The biggest on here is the last one, and I need to talk about this on the next slide. NLRB removed 2 commissioners, 1 from the EEOC. Sorry, reverse of that. 2 from the EEOC, 1 right now from the NLRB. There could be a second. It was not announced on the 27th, so I don't know. These have a big impact. Also, the general counsel is fully understood that it would happen. The commissioner was not understood that would happen, but Biden started this trend with Social Security. There was, and I've got the bullet right down here, in 2021, Biden removed a commissioner. That was challenged. It was upheld by the administration is completely normal. That means commissioners are fair game. What this did is twofold. Number one, there is no quorum. What that means is neither the EEOC nor the NLRB can meet right now. They don't have enough members to meet. All of these people have said they're going to challenge this. That's months. They won't, or if they do, they'll already be replaced, and it'll just be monetary because they will be replaced just like Andrew Saul was back in 2021, and there was no recourse other than monetary. So right now, and I don't know that the Trump administration has thought this through on one thing, which is they don't like the NLRB rulings and policies right now. They can't undo those until they have a quorum. Same with the EEOC. So this is a frozen in time situation. You still have to comply with the NLRB, but they have no ability to enforce it. And they have a policy directive to the new general counsels when they are put in place that they will not enforce those various provisions that were previously enforced. So that has a double-edged sword. Be careful not to change too much until this is done, but it does freeze everything, and there are big changes coming to the EEOC. They won't be doing DEI enforcement. They will only be enforcing the law as is. I believe they will also do a policy change on the criminal background, where you can't discriminate against a criminal. They'll be changing some of those policies as well. NLRB is going to get rid of the collective bargaining issues, a lot of the issues with the employment agreements, non-covenant not to compete, and so on. Those are all going to be put back to where they were, where it's a state-driven non-compete issue. The last one, tax implications. I'm not going to cover it. I'm just going to tell you, I already talked about all of this before. These are anticipated to be extended. These are in 2017. They're already in place, but they were set to expire this year. It looks like it's going to go through because nobody wants to increase all of your taxes. Then we're at the questions. There you go. I know I'm right at the
All right,
50
Jim.
minute, and I'm sorry.
Here we go. Here's some questions. This is a relatively large one, so get ready. Most of our clients recognize that diverse insights and perspectives increase innovation, strengthen culture, and enhance customer representation. How can we ensure that marginalized populations have equitable access to opportunities under the new administration while maintaining a fair and a consistent approach for all employees? What implications might this have on employee resource groups, internships programs that may be targeted for diverse populations, pay equity and transparency, or any kind of supplier diversity requirements?
All right. So the impact is, if you can go back this far, look back 5 years ago and all the way back to the 80s and enforce those legal principles. You still, and this is why I still teach the need for inclusion of diverse groups, diversity in thought, diversity in background, education, race, gender, ethnicity, LGBTQTAI plus. Inclusion of all of those in your culture is beautiful and great. And that's what we've been preaching on these. That is something you need to do. What you don't want to do is have that to the detriment of a different protected classification, population, etc. So if you've gone to the point where you're saying we must have, I'm just using this as an example, we must have a gay Black person on this in this group or in our employment. Reframe that, because that is saying we will not have someone who is equally or better qualified who is a white gay or a white woman or a Black straight man. Those are the issues that you have to be mindful of. Do not eliminate your culture. Do not go backwards on culture, because the diversity, the inclusion of diverse groups in business is a fabulous, great, helps businesses be stronger, helps them to have more family atmosphere. That's not what my legal analysis is about. This legal analysis is the same as I've had to say all the way along. And just in case you didn't know where I came from in this, I actually did discrimination law for 20 years before I started doing corporate side, working with them to make sure they didn't get sued. I was the one suing companies for mainly race discrimination. I was the very first, I represented a lesbian woman who was being discriminated against and literally got the ruling from a future Supreme Court Justice of Kentucky that said our laws don't protect sexual orientation. I was the one on the cutting edge of a lot of those cases, trying to show how people need to be treated better. What I'm saying is there's a difference between culture and legality. And make sure your culture insistence isn't forcing a policy that leads to illegal activity. That's the line you have to be careful of. So it's not, don't undo the good parts of your inclusion policy, of your access to your company, of your open door policies, of listening to different diverse backgrounds. Be careful that you're not then saying one step further, and oh, by the way, we will only recognize for this position, or we're going to give preference and priority to these particular types of protected classifications. That's the issue.
Okay. What is the recommendation on any affirmative action plans folks might already have in place? Somebody pays a third party to complete that for them on an annual basis.
Yeah. So affirmative action was already challenged before. And it was University of Michigan, Harvard University, and I'm sorry, I don't remember the third one. They were engaging in giving minority candidates additional consideration and selecting lesser qualified from different backgrounds. And just in case you aren't aware of which group it was, the Asian group sued I know that was in the Harvard case. I believe it was also in the University of Michigan case, because they had the highest test scores. They had the highest competency rating score, everything, GPAs, and they were being discriminated against. So they actually sued to say that the law doesn't allow for affirmative action, meaning giving higher priority based solely upon someone's race, color, sexual orientation, so on. So this is an older issue, and it came out that it is illegal to engage in pre-selection or selective recruitment based upon protected classifications and omitting a class of people who are better qualified simply based upon their background. Affirmative action as written in anything predating 2020, 2019, I think is when that case came out. I could be wrong. Anything older than that that's affirmative action is outdated. It needs to be looked at. There are parts of affirmative action that are good that you can still do, but you cannot literally say, we're going to take someone, and it's basically the affirmative action was the precursor to DEI. You cannot engage in, we are going to target and give priority to a certain classification before we consider others that are better qualified. I have gone to the point of suggesting that when you're initially screening candidates, you should not have any information as to their race, color, sexual orientation, anything, because you should look merit-based first before you look at anything else. We've gone so far as to redact anything in resumes that may lead to understanding somebody's ethnicity, background, or anything else, and then asking a independent committee to evaluate the best criteria of all of the people before we ever go any further.
Okay.
Chase, any other questions that
I
came to
think
you?
that's it on questions.
All right, I
So
want
the
to
only
kick it over
thing
to Lyle. Oh,
can I
sorry,
just
Jim.
leave you with one thing? I know this is scary, and I know that this is a big change. It's why take things in little doses when you make changes, when you're looking into things, but go back to the golden rule. Treat everybody the same regardless of background. If you need to address things, this is not as frightening as it sounds, because this is literally how you operated under Clinton, Obama, Bush 1, Bush 2, Trump 1, all the way until there was a policy that said this shall be what you have to do. It's do not destroy what you've built. Tweak it. Remove anything that gives priority to one race over the other, but don't blow it up. Don't, the old saying, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Don't kill your good activities that you put together. Just be mindful of what the law is that supports those good activities, and make sure that you're not walking the wrong side of that line. That's all.
Well,
Jim, thank you.
stay online if you can, Jim, for a couple more questions. But Lyle had an announcement too about an event we've
All
got
right.
going on.
Yeah, Jim, can you
No,
hold on a bit? If people want to stay on and ask more questions, and Jim will do it, let's do it.
I'm going to stop my share so that you're front and center, Lyle.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted
There
to
you
announce
go.
something. This is just kind of fun because Tim Holbrook is on this call from the legislative LRC over in Frankfurt, and Katie Rainey is on here. She runs Kentucky SHRM for us out of Frankfurt. And you know, a lot of these issues have to do with legislative challenges. And so last year we did a big legislative event. We're going to do another one this year. All HR people are invited to it. It's a ton of fun. It's going to be on in Frankfurt on at the Capitol. It's going to be on March 4th, right, Katie? Raise your hand and say yes. I think I got that date right. It's been bouncing around, but before the
Yes.
end of the legislature, that's it. Okay, good. And but this year we're not only going to hear from a bunch of legislators because they're passing stuff that impacts us every day. And one thing I learned last year, there's no such thing as an HR lobbyist. They have no one over there that's an HR expert. So we went over, we took about 60 people. It was great. We're going to do it again this year. We're going to meet with legislators, but then we're going to go spend the rest of the afternoon with our own legislator or their staff. So they know who we are and we know who they are, and maybe they'll call us because there are a ton of laws every year that impact us in our workplaces. and we need to have some say about them. So that's kind of a fun thing. March 4, put it on your calendar. And
I'm going to go ahead and throw the details for that in the chat too. Katie, do we still have spaces open for folks to register?
Yes, it's getting close, but there are still some available spaces.
all right, let's get some people in there. Hey, thanks, Jim and Kendra and all the team. Good work.
Don't forget the SHRM credit is in the chat, so if you want to self-report,
Yeah.
make sure you copy paste that quickly.
Yeah. And Jim,
Okay.
you had one more question come.
Tried to answer a couple of the questions that popped in there, Kendra, at the end.
Thank you. Appreciate it. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. We'll be back on as things continue to evolve. A huge shout out and thank you for Jim for always keeping us up to date on these ever evolving changes, and appreciate the note of encouragement there at the end.
I don't want it to be doom and gloom. It's not, it's, I don't like always being the one to bring you the bad news, but that's what attorneys have to do in making sure you don't get sued later. That's all.
Yeah.
Thanks everybody for listening.
Thank you for joining us.